All right, looks like everybody's pretty much joined us. Good afternoon and welcome to Agency Resources for Private Landowners Affected by the Cameron Peak Fire. My name is Daniel Bowker. I'm a forester and a project manager for the Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed. CPRW is a local nonprofit. We've been active since the Hyde Park fire and helped lead recovery efforts after that fire and the 2013 floods. And our mission is to improve and maintain the ecological health of the Poudre River watershed through community collaboration. The first thing I want to say is that I'm deeply sorry if you, your family, or your property were affected by the Cameron Peak fire, the smoke, or the evacuations. We can all have faith that the watershed will recover, but in certain areas, it's going to need our help to protect the values that we all hold, like clean water, safe communities, and healthy forests. CPRW is working with the county, water providers, volunteer organizations, contractors, and many other groups to bring the right people together to coordinate post-fire planning and needs prioritization, to organize and lead critical post-fire restoration work, to effectively communicate with impacted communities throughout the watershed, to raise funds for watershed recovery work, and to continue the vital wildfire mitigation work in coordination with the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative. The focus today is on what the various agencies and organizations in our area can do to help you recover from this event on your fire-affected property. We've got a great panel with us today. We've got Shale Sabo, the Larimer Connects project manager with the Larimer County Office of Emergency Management. We have Max Erickson, supervisory forester with the Colorado State Forest Service. And we have Blake Osborne, water resources specialist with the Colorado Water Center and CSU Extension. Coming up in the new year, we'll continue this series of learning opportunities. We're going to focus on things like erosion control techniques, revegetation, post-fire ecology and ecosystem recovery, climate change, forest health and fire behavior, fire impacts on aquatic life and fisheries, and topics like those. We're going to have a short survey at the end of this presentation. There'll also be a link in a follow-up email that you'll get after this, and that will help us understand what you need to know about these things. I did want to mention that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube, to CPRW's YouTube channel soon. Please use the chat function for your questions. We'll be monitoring that. We're going to hold all questions to the end, let our three presenters say what they have to say, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and we'll try to address everyone's. Please follow CPRW's Facebook page and our website for information on upcoming webinars and events. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shale.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Good afternoon. My name is Shale Saba. I'm with the Larimer County Office of Emergency Management. For folks who do not know what the Office of Emergency Management is, we like to kind of make jokes that we are the chaos coordinators behind the scenes. So really our big role in a disaster or an event is to facilitate all of the organizations that are involved in response and then eventually in recovery as well. So we kind of have three kind of key areas that we work through. The first is to provide support to first responders out in the field. So in a typical event that looks like providing food or helping to allocate resources that folks might need to be able to do the life safety work that they need to do in the field. The second is assistance with public information. And then the third is support to the community. So we're the ones that help stand up folks like the Red Cross to provide sheltering, mass feeding, any of those kinds of things that happen in the community. So to kind of talk through the timeline for what we do in emergency management. So we have kind of an adage that says that recovery really starts at the time of the disaster. And so what that means is our job in emergency management is to not be focusing necessarily on what's happening right at this moment, but our job is to really be looking at, okay, what's going to be happening a few hours from now to a few weeks from now to months from now, and always be kind of thinking ahead and corroborating information in that way. So keeping an outlook on the next thing to come. And so we really call that consequence management. And we'll do that pretty frequently. We'll do assessments throughout the entire response phase to make sure that we are thinking about what those things are that could come down the line. So as a matter of fact, when COVID started, wildfires were very much on our radar as well, and thinking about, okay, if we're in a pandemic situation, what is our wildfire season going to look like this year? How is it going to change things? So thinking about stuff like sheltering and how that might be different was a conversation we were having earlier in the spring. So that's really our job, and the way we provide support the best to those folks that are involved in disaster management is by maintaining that situational awareness and making those connections as we need to. So kind of circling back to recovery starts at the time of the disaster, we're also thinking about, okay, after this incident is no longer a life safety issue, what is the things that we need to be what are the things we need to be thinking about along the line? So thinking about, potential flooding in the future. Floods tend to follow fires. Or who are the different organizations that we need to start getting together right away. So even in August, we were reaching out to folks like CPRW and saying, hey, we need to start thinking about what the impacts are that we're going to experience as a result of this fire. At that time, of course, it was pretty early on and still in a very remote part of Larimer County. So there wasn't as much of a community impact, but those conversations around, okay, this is obviously going to impact our watershed. What does that mean? What do we need to think about? What do we need to plan for was happening at that time. So kind of moving into the future, now that that response has really subsided, we are bringing in the heavy lift of recovery. And so one thing that I do want to make very clear is that recovery is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It definitely takes several years. But we have a lot of really great collaborative partners here in Larimer County that I feel very honored to be a part of this team, because we're going to get a lot of really great work done due to the fact that we all work together so well and that nobody really works in silos as much as you might see in a lot of other places around the country. So kind of what I focus on in the field of emergency management is that community support side of things. So my role in emergency management as the Larimer Connects program manager is to foster neighbor to neighbor connections and capacity building within communities. So we have found through national studies, through previous disasters, through lessons learned, that the communities that recover most quickly tend to be those that know their neighbors really well and are well connected and know how to support one another, but also those that are educated on how to access resources, how to build self-sustainability, how to help their neighbors prepare, that sort of thing. So really what we were working on kind of before COVID and before the fire was building those neighbor to neighbor connections and making sure that folks had good networks in place in their communities. A lot of you folks that might be on this call today might be aware of an organization known as the North 40 Mountain Alliance. That was really started out of the Larimer Connects initiative, where we reached out to communities that had been impacted by the Hyde Park fire back in 2012. And just kind of said, hey, what worked, what didn't back then, what could we do better? And there was that sentiment that we wished we'd known our neighbors better, or we wish that there was better communication chains. And communication is always going to be a struggle in disaster management, but one thing that communities can really help us with is making sure that we get that information out. You all know your communities much better than we do as government, and you know how messaging can be received best in your community. And so we really want to kind of build upon that. So how can we get a message to you in a way that you're going to receive it the best? What makes the most sense for you? What are the tools that you might use in your community? So really the idea is to create kind of a feedback loop so that we have a better understanding of how to connect with our communities at the local level. So what I'm going to be doing in recovery is really continuing that effort. It's going to be a little bit different in this kind of weird pandemic virtual environment where I can't typically do the outreach I normally would. I like to try to show up to pancake breakfast or community events and connect with folks kind of more on a face-to-face level and say, hey, what can we do to better serve your community, or how can we build more resilience in your community? But I'm going to be not able to do that as much, unfortunately. Pancakes though. So a couple things that folks should be aware of on this call as far as program stuff. Make sure that you are looking at the Larimer Connects program. So if you go to larimer.org/emergency, and I'll put this information in the chat as well, we have information on there on how to build more capacity as neighbors, things that we can help support with as far as trainings or Information sharing, we are well connected into all of our volunteer organizations that exist in Larimer County. So any way that we can help support by connecting communities that want to do like a cleanup day, for example, to a group like Team Rubicon that can help support those efforts, we can really help facilitate that process. I also encourage folks to sign up for our Larimer Connects newsletter, where we're going to be sending out information pertinent in recovery. So I'll be kind of echoing anything CPRW is sending out that I think our community members should know, as well as any kind of other recovery resources. I'll also be sharing information on how to get more integrated into Larimer Connects. If you have ideas you want to share with us, or ways that you think that you can help build more neighbor to neighbor connections, we're all for it. We're all here to support your efforts. The only thing that I want to emphasize at the end of the day is that we do want this to be a community-led effort. We don't want it to be something that government comes in and says, hey, this is how we think you can be a more resilient community, or this is how you should do things. You know what your community needs the most. You know what's most effective for your community. And so what we want to do is kind of take a step back from that lead role, let you lead, and we help support you in whatever way that looks like. So again, that can be connecting to neighbors, that can be connecting to organizations that can help support you, that can be providing information, and even we might be able to help connect to possible grant opportunities or funding that comes down the line that we're made aware of in recovery. So I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but I think that's kind of as much as I was going to give for today before I take too much time from our other folks. But thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Dale. That's really helpful. And I think our audience here can really tell that that's a good place to start. Start with Larimer County, that larimer.org/emergency, get on the Larimer Connects newsletter, organize with your neighbors, that kind of thing. I think that's a real good place to start. Thank you, Shell. Appreciate it. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Max Erickson with the Colorado State Forest Service. Thank you, Max.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. And thanks, Daniel and Jen, CPRW, and everybody else is putting this webinar together. This is good to get some information out to everyone that went through this past summer and the wildfires. Today, I just want to talk to you briefly about the Colorado State Forest Service, who we are, give you an overview of kind of the post-fire rehabilitation process, specifically to your forest, and then just a little bit more information on how we can help. So I'm going to start and see if I can just share my screen here. So lots of great information. So we're the State Forest Service. Obviously, we're around the entire state of Colorado. A really good resource for everyone is our website, csfs.colorado.state.edu. I will put that in the chat later. But here's a map of Colorado. We have plenty of field offices throughout the state. Up here in Fort Collins is where I'm out of our field office. So today, I just wanted to point you all towards some resources that you can have. A lot of them are on our website. Definitely like to distribute that out to everyone here. If you'd like more information, we'll get some contact info out at the end of the day. So, when we're thinking about the post-fire process, we definitely want to be careful in how we do that. And so lots of information on our website, but to start, want to make sure that, we're thinking about some safety. Forests are kind of naturally hazardous anyways, and especially after a burned area. So want to make sure we're thinking about that before you're getting out in the woods and doing any sort of work out there. Weather, wind and rain can provide for some especially dangerous conditions, when we just don't know exactly when any of those trees might come down. When you are out there, you want to make sure you're creating a safe environment for you to work in, before you get to planting or bring down some seed barriers, whatever that may be. So, using spotters, working with other folks to make sure that you're being safe out there. That's just something that, we want to recommend getting out there. Besides that, starting in those immediate high use areas, trying to take down any hazard trees around homes, roads, or any other places that, you might have those trees come down on. That's something you want to take care of first and foremost before you get towards anything else. And then, so, immediately after the fire, in the first year, we really want to focus on that soil stability stuff. There's a lot of other really good resources out there, and not just in our agency, that can help provide information and resources to do this. But this is pretty critical in that first year. And a lot of ways you can do that, putting down some hay bales, some straw wattles, just really trying to keep the soil where it is. Another, common technique is contour log felling of dead trees. And this we can see here in this kind of middle photo. That really just helps trap some of that soil so it doesn't start running off. That becomes particularly important when you're thinking about managing the forest long-term and the long-term recovery of having your vegetation come back. So, once you get that nailed down, thinking about the next year, you want to really kind of get to kind of assessing, what kind of damage your forest may have seen during that fire. Obviously, there's some areas that were burning extremely hot, some other areas that it was relatively low. And so a lot of times this takes some time before you really get a good handle on what the severity is, especially in the low to medium severity fire areas. But you can start looking at, levels of scorching on the bark or in the needles in the trees. But another telltale sign of kind of tree health on any one tree is in the bark, which is this picture here. That's the inner bark, or the cambium is kind of the blood of the tree. And so you can kind of take an axe and chip that away. And if it's dried out or it has off colors, that can be an issue and show signs that maybe that tree won't, survive long term. There's a lot of other really good resources out there. Our friends at the USDA Forest Service have some good guidelines on some other tree assessments. So that's something to think about, especially when you're looking to manage your forest long term. So after you kind of figure that out, and if you think, down the road that, you're going to need to plant some trees, you want to, think about a lot of things, but you want to make sure you're having the right species planted. We like to recommend some of our native Colorado species like Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine. Really kind of depends upon your particular area. But thinking about where you're going to plant those, planting them in the shadows of some stumps or other areas that can help protect those seedlings. But you also want to think about, Colorado's in a very high drought right now, and so watering those seedlings immediately and long-term is going to be incredibly important to their long-term success. So we do have some information about that as well on our website as well, some good planting guides. You can scroll through, just things to think about if and when you get down that point. Again, that's going to be, after you've taken care of soil stability and all of that. So long-term care and as far as getting seedling storage. Finally, I'd just like to direct everyone. We have a lot of really good information on our website under our publications pages. A lot of these things that I've clicked through already is located here. If you go to our publication page, a lot of, just really good general information about managing your forest. But under the wildfire mitigation and education section, we do have a post-fire rehabilitation area where a lot of these documents with a lot of really good information that you can pick up as a landowner and start to think through how you may be working through this. So finally, our role as an agency is, we're here to help you as the landowners, but also our local cooperators, both in information, but coordinating efforts as well. So a lot of these, information through our publications is a great way to start that. And, we can also be able to assist, with some technical efforts, on the community level. We do want to, help you and have everybody help each other. And so trying to leverage, whether it be, webinars like this or community-wide meetings, that's where we can come in and really be the greatest impact that we can. So just some contact information here on our page. This is for our Fort Collins field office. Just again, thanks for everyone, and thanks Daniel for setting this up. I'm gonna kick it back to you.
Great, Max. Thank you very much. A lot of really good information there, and a couple things you said really stuck out. One, the safety aspect. You're exactly right. I mean, these trees are going to start falling soon, as soon as we have some wind events, and even on still days, a lot of those trees will be coming down. So be careful if you're out on your property with burned trees for sure. And about the tree planting, that's also really good advice there. Everybody wants to do something, and planting trees is one thing that, a lot of us are going to want to do after this fire, but paying real close attention to where you plant those trees. Can you get to them to water them? Are they going to be, really exposed to sun and wind? When I worked in Boulder County, we were in areas of the 4 Mile fire there, and a lot of people that had put out, hundreds of seedlings had very little success because they weren't really thinking about, those specific microsites and things, where to plant them. So really good advice there. Thank you very much. I'm going to switch it over now to Blake Osborne. He's with the CSU Water Center and CSU Extension. Thank you, Blake.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the chance to be on this call today and talk with you all. I do represent the Water Center, and I'm actually located here in Canyon City, Colorado. So I'm your southern neighbor. But I run a program that's a statewide program called WAVE, the Watershed Assessment and Vulnerability Evaluation. WAVE would be the acronym. And basically the whole intention behind the program is to provide some technical assistance to private landowners following wildfire, and specifically looking at it through a hydro lens. So obviously within the Water Center, the assessment is mostly concerned with the soil stabilization and the flooding aspect of post-fire. So it's usually a pretty quick response because those are some of the first problems to pop up. And as Max was talking about, and trying to set it up for success for long-term recovery. But the assessment is kind of a first in the door, working with private landowners to look at the conditions, take all this information that's kind of swirling around the fire, because it can be such an information firestorm to some degree, bear maps and bark maps and all these different things. And I know Shale and that office does a really great job of distilling that. But what we try to do is go on the property with the landowners and make sense of some of that, but then also validate that information. Some of that stuff is done at a scale that it needs some validation. So so that's WAVE in a nutshell. I've already been working so far this year on assessments in the Pine Gulch fire region. I just got off last week, the East Troublesome fire. And I've been talking with a few folks up there on the Cameron Peak fire, just doing some remote work. But the heart of the WAVE assessment is really to get out on the land. And again, as Max was showing, there's a lot of great resources out there, and there's a lot of good science around post-fire water cycle stabilization. But a lot of landowners, what we have found is that, and I have a great quote from a guy who said he showed up to his property after the fire came through and just said, "Man, I don't know what to do, but my better angels are telling me to do something." And we've had that experience with a lot of folks saying, "I don't know what to do, but I feel like I got to do something and quick." And so before property owners or landowners take a lot of time or money and invest that in places that may or may not be the best bang for the buck, our goal is to go out and walk through and say, okay, what are some priority areas? If you were to spend, say, $1,000 or plant X number of seedlings, where might you get the best return for that? And do it on a very site-specific basis. So I did see Olivia Clark is on here. Olivia is the extension agent up in Grand County, and I just was with her last week. And the WAVE program is also administered kind of through that grassroots network that Extension has, and also a couple of times I've worked with the State Forest Service, and I'm looking to expand that relationship. So it's great to meet you, Max, and I think hopefully we can work together on this fire. But a lot of times I'm also going to kind of speak for Extension, even though I don't really have an Extension appointment, but we work so closely with Extension that I know a lot of agents get a lot of information right off the bat because they're such embedded community members with typically some sort of resource management in their job descriptions. So in Larimer County, I've been talking with Karen Crumbaker. And so what the WAVE program does is try to support people like Karen when they get a lot of these questions and be able to do these site assessments. Right now, the fire season has obviously been one for the ages. And so we've been working really hard, but we have some opportunity if anyone's interested in these assessments to actually put kind of some field days together, come up, do assessments. Then from that information, we take some data measurements And then we'll provide landowners with a personalized kind of recovery plan. Again, really focusing on the flooding and the erosion hazards. But yeah, landowners can get a personalized recovery plan. And I also get the question that, well, you know, how do you guys coordinate with NRCS and specifically the Emergency Watershed Protection Program? And it's a really good question, because what we do is actually, it kind of runs parallel, and it was developed with people from the NRCS as well. As a lot of you know, the EWP program or the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, is kind of the main source of public funding, at least for private lands. So a lot of private landowners will tap into that, but even the NRCS will have some limitations with not only what they can fund, but how many things they can fund. And these really big fires are really stretching that to the limit. So WAVE, unfortunately, doesn't provide any funding, but what we can do is kind of fill the gaps that the EWP assessments don't address. And typically there are some relatively, you know, low tech options for rehabilitating your land and stabilizing that water cycle that don't take a lot of engineering or designing to implement. Like Max was showing, some of those contour felled log erosion barriers, straw wattles, things like that. So we're really just trying to fill that gap of if it doesn't necessarily meet the EWP's guideline of funding or priority, you know, we can help assist, because maybe it is a priority for the landowner. So really, this is a landowner-driven assessment, trying to identify the needs of the landowners and put reports together, recovery plan reports to stabilize the water cycle. And there's more information I could share, but I think I'll stop there. And yeah, I guess, I don't know if we're going to take questions at all, Daniel, now or later.
Sure, that's great, Blake. Thank you very much. That's great information. And I am glad you mentioned NRCS as well. They couldn't be with us today, but they are another good organization. Again, that's a USDA branch, Natural Resources Conservation Service. I will post their local contact information in the chat here in a little bit, but they are another good resource to reach out to. Yeah, let's go ahead and take some questions. If Shale and Max want to pop back on here, I've been monitoring the chat box, and we've got a couple about seedlings, and maybe we'll start with those. So Max, what would the cost be for seedlings, and will the State Forest Service nursery have some available, and what time frame?
Hey, yeah, that's a great question about seedlings. I don't have any information about the costs directly off the top of my head. However, if you go to our website, to our nursery section, they're going to be able to provide you with just more details on what the actual cost is going to be and availability of that. Unfortunately, I just don't have that off the top of my head.
Sure, great, thank you. And let's see, I've got one question here that, and maybe I'll kind of answer this, or maybe Shale can speak to this too. But it says, our property up the Poudre Canyon burned to a crisp. We've had the USDA conservationist, so that would be NRCS, come out and assess the property. But this person is wondering how much coordination there is between NRCS, the county, the State Forest Service, et cetera. And I'll answer part of that, and then maybe Shale can speak to this as well. But we are doing our best to do that coordination. So we've put together a tracking sheet so that all of our agencies and organizations can say who we've talked to and when. And so, you know, we're all partnered into that, and hopefully won't be duplicating efforts and that kind of thing. So, you know, you can rest assured that, you know, we are talking to each other, and hopefully there won't be too much duplication. But Shale, is that, do you want to step in on that and say, you know, where's the best place to start?
Sure. So as far as our coordination goes at the county, similar to when a disaster occurs, our office is kind of that lead facilitator and convener of all of these different agencies that are working together. Not so much in a we tell everybody what to do kind of a sense, but really to kind of help to not duplicate efforts, make sure that everybody's being super efficient, that we're sharing information across lines, all of that. So really, we're just kind of a centralized area that helps make sure that the work is being done that needs to get done, and that everybody's on the same page, really, is how we help. And then what was the second part of your question, Daniel?
I think you pretty much answered it. It's,
Okay.
how are we all coordinating on this? And, there's another one that just popped up, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit too, but can you give us an idea of how the county is working with the National Forest in restoration and recovery?
Yep. So the National Forest is involved in our recovery organization. So to kind of dive into that a little bit, so we have a recovery structure, and it's got 9 different work areas as of right now, and all of these work areas are from community support, kind of what I specialize in, or my kind of area of focus, to the environmental side, to infrastructure, to we have a committee just looking at funding and grants, and we have a committee that's all just communications focused. So it's this massive organization made up of a bunch of different entities that are all involved in this. And that's really the whole point of it, is to make sure that we're doing this as collaboratively as possible, that we are connected as much as possible, and that nobody's doing anything in a silo. So as far as our work with the forest, so the forest is obviously their own jurisdiction, but we'll help share information across lines. We're working together on things like the EWP program that Blake mentioned, and any of those assessments that are coming down the line. So we'll take any of that data that's kind of identified in there, and do things like work with the National Weather Service to develop alert and warning systems, or figure out what kind of warnings need to be put into place, because the landscape's changed and flooding might be more prone in an area now than it would have been previously before the fire. So really, I guess, kind of long story short is, yes, they are involved in our recovery structure. We're communicating as much as possible, and we share data, information, and identify where we can work together on specific projects as it pertains to restoration work.
Great, thanks very much. That's really helpful. I got a question on managing resulting invasives. So as we know, in a lot of these areas, after they're burned, you've got a lot of bare ground, and some invasive species may come in. I don't know, Blake or Max, you guys want to mention what you might do for managing invasives? Would you seed? What would you do?
I could maybe jump in there first. Yeah, managing those invasive weeds is going to be pretty important, long term, especially when you want to promote, native species, whether it be trees, grasses, forbs, or otherwise. And so generally, I just recommend being able to identify them. There are a lot of good information, identification sheets online, but, either through some sort of spraying, but a lot of times, mechanical removal of those. After these fire events, when a lot of the vegetation is removed, that seed bank of those invasive seeds are kind of left in there, and those are kind of the first, plants that we see grow up first. So it is important to kind of get on that as well during this first initial stage.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful. I think there will be some weed issues probably after this fire. And Shayla, maybe you can speak to this just a little bit, but I know Larimer County Weed District can possibly help out on some of that.
Yeah, I think they're a great resource to reach out to. The other place that I would encourage folks to reach out is the Larimer County CSU Extension. They have a ton of great resources in this whole area. So if the weed district can't connect you or isn't able to support in some way, I think the extension can help figure out a good connection for everybody.
Great, very helpful, thanks. We have posted in the chat right now, Matt Norville with the State Forest Service has posted a link for the State Forest Service nursery inventory and pricing. That's really helpful, thank you, Matt. And he also said if the nursery sold out of the species you want, you could check out the West Greeley Conservation District. That's a good place to go, possibly Fort Collins Conservation District as well. All right, so Blake mentioned NRCS EWP funding. Can you share a little bit more about that funding source, the planning process, timelines, what assessments are going to go into place to get those funds on the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And I will qualify it that I'm no expert on this side of it. So I would definitely reach out to the NRCS with specific questions. But in general, like I said, the NRCS is kind of the go-to agency for technical assistance and funding for actual on-the-ground projects on private lands. And EWP works it works. The funding is basically comes from the government through an appropriation, I believe, but don't quote me on that. But I know that each EWP has to be signed off in DC to release that funding. So the state conservationists or possibly the district conservationists will request that. They have 60 days to request that after an event, and then they have to find a local sponsor. And usually that's it can be a county government or some sort of local government, a special district, a couple of different agency types, I guess, that can be the fiscal agent for these big grants. And then from there, they can release that to engineering support, so to actually plan and design these projects, and then for some actual on the ground work. So the timeline can lag anywhere from 3 months to a year before projects can get going in the experience that I've had with these different fires. And then the assessments themselves, they're called damage survey reports, DSRs, and you can find them online. So if you're interested in seeing exactly what goes into them, just Google or search that damage survey report NRCS, and you can look at these forms. But essentially, the NRCS has a mandate to protect life and property, and there are specific things that qualify for life and property under the definition of what they have, and there's certain things that don't. So that's where there are some gaps in that a landowner may care about something, and it may not necessarily fall under the definition of property or life threatening. And so that's where the waive kind of supplements that. But yeah, the NRCS it's a robust and really well used assessment, but it's called a damage survey report.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Maybe this is a good one for Shale. Are there any financial resources available to help landowners with costs related to seeding, that kind of thing?
So that is again where I would point folks to the Larimer County CSU extension. They would have a lot more information on that than I do at this time.
Great, thanks, Shale. And I know that here at CPRW, we're working to find all those grant opportunities. So stay in touch with us, and we're coordinating with Shale in the county, and we'll know a lot more about those here soon. I've got a question here about slash management. Looks like somebody actually put in some fire line with the tractor, felled many trees, raised the canopies, but now we have a massive amount of slash to manage. Maybe Max, could you speak to what to do about all that slash?
Yeah, obviously cutting down any one tree is workload in itself, but managing kind of the slash or the branches and everything is a lot. And so that's something we see a lot. And, there are some programs out there that have chippers. I know people are working to find ways to manage this more effectively. Obviously pile burning is something that people use quite often, and it's getting more difficult with shorter winters and all of that. I would point people to, just like everything, we have a big net of partners that we all work with, everyone here today, but even larger. Some of the local fire protection districts might have, access to something like that. So that's something I would definitely point towards. And if not, reach out and maybe we can find something to help you out.
Great, thank you. Yeah, the local fire protection districts may be a good place to start, especially for some of those really affected communities. I know there's going to be a lot of slash out there. The Forest Service is working on cleaning up their own slash, and there's going to be quite a bit on private property, I'm sure. I'll also mention that CPRW works in that arena, and so if you have a specific project in mind in a neighborhood, reach out to me, Daniel@PoudreWatershed.org, and we can talk about what's possible there. There are some funding sources where we could help try to get rid of some of that. One more for you, Max. Any thoughts on plans for adapting tree plantings for increased temperatures in the future?
That's a great question. I'll try to keep it somewhat short, but yes, something we're definitely thinking about. As foresters, we're managing these forests and lands, very long term. In Colorado, life of a tree can be, up to 500 years sometimes. And so thinking about what species you are planting and what that might look like in the future, looking at climate models and everything, but looking at certain species that are adapted to that warmer level already. So thinking about maybe ponderosa pine or those lower elevation species, might be a good place to start. But every tree species has a lot of adaptations that they've kind of had over time that make them better than others in certain scenarios. So definitely something to think about. And when you are looking at planting certain tree species, definitely something I would think about as well.
Good, thank you. Blake, can you one more time go over the difference between the NRCS damage survey report and the WAVE assessment process?
Yeah, sure. I guess the biggest difference would be the WAVE assessment will give, and actually I could share, can I share my screen, Daniel? I have an assessment pulled up I could show just to give an idea roughly what I'm talking about. Are you guys able to see this? A Word document? Yeah, okay. This is a property on the Pine Gulch fire. And I have the permission to share this, and I've shared this several times with people. But that's another thing is WAVE, it works with private landowners, and so the information that we gather is always confidential unless somebody says, yeah, you can talk to this person about it or this person about it. But this is an example of an assessment from earlier on the Pine Gulch fire. So there's a little bit of GIS work that goes into it to identify some things at risk. Some of these things, like, for example, here, these culverts, these are something that NRCS would classify as property. So what we went ahead and did is just to measure these culverts, because we were out there before the NRCS, to provide a little bit of a leg up so that they didn't have to do it. We've coordinated with the NRCS to basically, if we go out and do an assessment, they'd like to know what some of these values at risk are. And so we can feed that to them, and sometimes they'll accept these and as basically a damage survey report, or other times they'll have to go out and verify some things that maybe we didn't pick up on if it's something really specific. But we'll go out and identify values at risk, give a little bit of context to each one, and then basically make a priority ranking for how important it is to actually address and how soon it should be addressed. So, we'll do slope analyses and some GIS work that's a little bit more in depth that the NRCS damage survey reports don't necessarily do. But really at the end, what'll come out of it is a summary of these final recommendations with the recommendation, and then, like I said, a priority ranking of how soon they should be done based off flooding or erosion risk. So without showing a damage survey report, this is just one side of it, but the damage survey report is a form that's been developed, over several years, and is more or less redundant, whereas the WAVE, it's a little bit more flexible. But we also try to coordinate with the NRCS and also with the Colorado Water Conservation Board to make sure that we're capturing things on a property that maybe they might be interested in. And then if the landowner says, yeah, that's great, go ahead and talk to the NRCS. We'd like to know if we could get help from that, then we can work together to share that information. So let me try to stop sharing now. Okay. I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess, the thing that we tried to build with WAVE is flexibility for the landowner's needs, whereas the damage survey report might take a broader perspective, like a watershed approach. And so they might be trying to protect something that doesn't necessarily affect the landowner per se, but may affect something downstream, which is very helpful and great, but it may not address all of the landowner's needs. And so what we try to do is kind of backfill that and address small things, sometimes too, like driveways or other things, that might kind of slide under the radar of the damage survey reports.
Great, that's very helpful, and I think that's a good point to bring up, is that sometimes it's it's the one culvert that's causing a whole lot of damage, and if that's not addressed, you've got a lot of sediment input, or a problem that you could easily probably take care of on a landowner scale. And that's a great way to find those things. And I will mention that Blake and I have been talking about getting some of those WAVE assessments done in this area. And so we're coordinating with CSU Extension on that. And if you're interested, and I've already seen some people in the chat box that are interested in this kind of thing, please get a hold of me, Daniel@poudrewatershed.org, and we'll put you on a list. There will be a lot of people that are interested in assessments and help and that kind of thing. And we are working on a prioritization scheme to see where the really impactful properties are. But I would love to know if you're interested in something like that. Got a couple questions about seed and seeding, and we also have a link from the Native Plant Society posted in the chat as far as where to get native plant seeds, and I think that's really helpful. I will mention too that there are several different ways to go about seeding, and native plants, of course, are a great way to go. But in a lot of areas, especially areas that weren't terribly severely burned, you're going to have a pretty good seed bank. And if you wanted to put something down, there's a sterile triticale out there that's relatively cheap that could just germinate, hold that soil in place, and then it's not going to reproduce. And so that's something that would allow those native seeds to come back over the next several years. So that's something to think about there. But there's a good link about where to get native seed. Let's see, there's a question about a community slash pile. I think Max already addressed that fairly well. Burning not great for lungs during the COVID season. That's very true. That being said, there are some plans in the works to burn some of the slash piles in the National Forest and on some private property in the watershed. So you'll be hearing more about that from us and from the county and the Forest Service coming up about that over the winter. What else do we have here? We've got a waste management question, Shale. This might be a good one for you. Waste management or salvage companies currently accepting metal debris?
I'm not sure of anyone off the top of my head. However, Toby, I'll have you shoot me an email with your situation, because there might be a couple organizations I can think of that I might direct you to. But that is something for folks to be aware of, is any kind of debris that's coming from the Cameron Peak area all needs to be considered to have asbestos. And so it needs to have those regulations around it. So any kind of disposal, make sure that you're following those. Yeah, Toby, I'll put my email in the chat here and see if I can help connect you to someone who might be able to help you out.
Great, thanks for that, Shale. And I'm seeing another one here about Glacier View, and used to have a community slash pile and that kind of thing, and what to do with. I mean, this person is correct. Your county burn permit is only going to allow you to burn 50 piles per year. The pile size is limited, the material size is limited, etc. I will mention that there's an organization called the Forest Stewards Guild who is working on some burn planning in that area right now. So if you want to reach out to me, I can help connect you there. And they're working on some programmatic burn permitting that could cover larger areas. One area we're looking at right now where we've done a good bit of mitigation work and created a lot of slash piles is in the Elkhorn Creek drainage. And they're working on a burn permit for that area that could be kind of an umbrella permit where you would have these smaller tactical permits for specific jobs. And I understand there's a lot of slash out there. So if you want to connect with me on that, maybe I can help connect you with some resources there. And I think Max addressed that earlier too, as far as, what they could do. Here's another one about consider providing services on properties not affected by the recent fires. That's a really good point. There's a lot of wildfire mitigation work left to do out there. Max, is that something that you wouldn't mind touching on for a minute? Who's doing what and what could be available?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a large part of obviously what our agency does as part of providing service to Colorado. But we're heavily on the mitigation side. So working with all the local cooperators like we have here today to do a lot of planning, coordination amongst different types of projects. But also offering, different types of grant programs that can help reduce some of those cost shares. So that's a lot of things, that we want to keep promoting. Manage your forest is not just a one-time deal. It's a long-term ongoing thing. And so that's where, we really shine and help bring that level of planning to, landowners like yourself, but also communities and even counties. So that's something we're definitely looking into. One example of that is our current grant opportunity that's open right now is our Forest Restoration Wildfire Risk Reduction Grant. It is closing tomorrow, but that's a huge grant opportunity that landowners can apply for, or groups of landowners that can apply for, to do a lot of that mitigation work and get some cost share funding towards that. We do see a lot of that on kind of an annual basis. And so that's something we wanted to promote, but just want to reiterate, there's a lot of coordination and planning that goes on with us and our partners and individual landowners to make that mitigation site happen.
Great, that's really helpful. Thank you, Max. And to follow up on that, there are many organizations that are active in wildfire mitigation, and that would include the local VFDs and the State Forest Service, CPRW, lots of other folks. We do work as a collaborative organization under something called the Northern Colorado Watershed Collaborative. We have a meeting, a 2-hour meeting about that tomorrow. So a lot of these issues will be brought up. Some of these things are not obvious always to community members, but we will be promoting some of what we've been doing as far as the coordination goes with Watershed here soon. And that will entail things like, one of these questions says, if we have multiple property owners that want to band together and get mitigation work done, then yes, there are definitely opportunities for that. I would love to talk to you and your neighborhood about that. I did a little bit of that outreach summer before last, couldn't do a whole lot of that this year just because of COVID restrictions and that kind of thing. But we were able to identify several areas in the Upper Poudre watershed that had, plenty of community members that were interested in doing mitigation. And it's not a fast time frame, that's for sure. Like Max mentioned, there's the furworm grant that's coming out. I'll be putting one of those in tomorrow. I know a lot of other organizations will too, but there are 3 or 4 of those major grants a year. If we can put together a project, submit it for that grant the next year, get that funding, and then that's one way to go about doing some of these kind of multiple property owner projects. Again, not a fast process, and there are a whole lot of people that need that help, but I would love to talk to you about getting that process started if possible. We have one here from Chief Jones with the Glacier View Fire Department, and he wants to clarify that Glacier View Fire Department burns the community slash piles, but not private piles, and their permit only covers the community piles. So that's worth knowing there. Let's see. And Max, got a question here about that grant opportunity. Can you share maybe even just the webpage where those grant opportunities are located? That might be helpful for folks.
Yeah, I tried posting to the chat there, but I'm more than happy to send that to you, Daniel, or otherwise. But under our website, you can go to the grants and funding page, and that's where you'll find a lot of really good information about that.
Great. I see that over there now, Max. Thank you for posting that. Yep, that's very helpful. Let's see. I think I've run through most of the questions that I've seen in chat here. I've got one from Courtney Gutman. She's the executive director of the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition. And she says if folks in the Big T are interested in collaborative forest management or fire mitigation, to please get a hold of her, and her contact information is there. And I know a lot of the private property, this fire was interesting in that about 2/3 of the acreage was in the Poudre watershed, but about 2/3 of the private property acreage is actually in the Big T, and especially when it made that run up and over Buckhorn on that one weekend. So a lot of private properties affected there. All right, any other questions that anybody has at the moment? I do see one here, another Glacier View question. That might, let's see, the Glacier View community piles, are those within the subdivision, or does that extend to the entire Glacier View Fire District? We don't have Chief Jones on here. He is he's watching, but he's not a panelist. But I think that'd be a great place to start, is to start with him for those particular answers there. Here's one that I did miss earlier. Thank you for reposting. For those of us with properties along streams, when should we start looking to obtain flood insurance, and what does that involve? Shale, is that something you could speak to?
Yeah, so flood insurance is actually something that cannot be done through your typical insurance agency. That's a government program through FEMA. So I will find the website here and throw that in the chat.
Very good, thank you. I did want to make sure to mention, and please, if you have more questions, post them up. We have a few more minutes here, but I did want to mention that we will be continuing this webinar series later in the winter. So starting January, February, you'll start seeing stuff from us about some of those other topics that I mentioned. So some of the post-fire ecology and ecosystem recovery, questions about fisheries and aquatic impacts, more technical information on some of the erosion control techniques that have already been mentioned, some more about revegetation, etc. So you can stay up to date on that. You can check the Larimer Connects newsletter. Will have information about that. You can also follow CPRW on Facebook and check our website. We'll have information for that coming out. And it looks like Shale has also posted in the chat the Larimer County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. That should be going out for comment here in January, and you can find that on their website. Okay. Questions have slowed down and we're nearing 1 o'clock here. We do have a few more minutes, but I'm not seeing more questions come in. Anything the three of you all would like to add here at the end?
I'll go. I did put in the chat that we are, speaking of mitigation, updating our Larimer County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. It's the longest title ever, but that's a government plan for you, I guess. So we're finalizing kind of that process here in the next few months. And so be on the lookout in January is likely when we're going to be doing our public comment period. So we definitely would like to get folks' input on that plan to make sure that we are thinking about everything that could impact our community members. So I'll post the website for our hazard mitigation plan updates in here too.